यस म्यूट कर ना
ना जी चालू है।
Yes, Dr. Akash, you can switch on the video. We'll start the meeting. Yes. So, good morning all. Welcome back to Saturday Club morning meeting. And today we have very eminent speaker, Dr. Akash Kumar Singh. He has several degrees to his credit. Basically, he is a very eminent consultant physician from Vadodara. He has done his MD in internal medicine, MSc diabetes, FRCP from Edinburgh, FACP, FICP, Fellow Diabetes India, FRSSDI, FIACM. And his areas of interest are internal medicine, diabetology, non-interventional cardiology, and several positions he has held in various organizations. President, Indian Diabetic Association and Cardiometabolic Disease Association, Vice President, Association of Physicians of Vadodara, Vice President, CCDSI, Clinical Cardiodiabetes Society of India, Executive Body Member of Association of Physicians of Gujarat, Vadodara District Coordinator, RSSDI, Faculty Member of Online PGCC. He has published multiple research papers in international Indian journals and poster presentation in various conferences. He is author of the book, Management of Diabetes Mellitus, a complete practical guide. He has written chapters in SEDICODE, Textbook of Diabetes, ICP, COVID-19 monograph, has given several talks across national and international conferences, and has an active collaboration as principal investigator in medical research at national and state level. And he is reviewer in international journals in diabetes. So with so much of credits to his work, we are very happy to have you, Dr. Akash Singh, for the first time in Saturday Club of Vadodara. So welcome to Saturday Club of Vadodara. And Dr. Akash is going to talk about cardiovascular disease in women with diabetes. So over to you, Dr. Akash. You have about 40-45 minutes, and then we'll spare some 10-15 minutes for interaction. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for the introduction. Actually, the lucky part with me is that Dr. Kiran Shah is with me, and as you know that he is a very avid researcher. So right. I got into the research because of working with him, because he already was into it, and he could guide me into this research process. And we generally do all the research which is now on national level together only, because he has a very keen sense of research. So today's topic basically is a topic which is a very pertinent topic in today's era, because of several factors which we'll discuss as we discuss slides. But the brief story is that the women who think that they are immune from cardiac disease are more predisposed to it, and how they are more predisposed to it, and what is the peculiarities of their illness, that we'll see in this presentation. I hope the slides are visible. I hope the slides are visible.
Yes.
Yes, very well visible, audible, both.
So, prior to 1984, the statistics for cardiovascular deaths were in favor of women, and it was widely believed that women are protected against cardiovascular disease. However, after 1984, it was seen that more diabetic women are dying of cardiovascular disease than men. And despite taking 12 years to recognize and take action on this front, the mortality continues to be more in diabetic women with cardiovascular disease although the mortality rates have plateaued since then. So the next slide will illustrate this more amply. Now, this is about women and heart disease, and you can see that the trend in this is the women's part. So the cardiovascular disease incidence kept on rising basically, and then it was recognized after 1984 that this is the case basically, and then there was a dip again. It rose and rose, and now it has plateaued. So this higher incidence of cardiovascular deaths, morbidity, and mortality is attributed to something called as Yentl syndrome. Now, what is Yentl syndrome? Yentl syndrome is that the symptoms of cardiovascular disease in women are different from that in men. What is described in textbook is generally the symptoms of ischemic heart disease or coronary ischemia, which are seen in men, but not in women. Have more of shortness of breath, more of fatigue, more of sort of dyspnea on. So they have different symptoms which are not listed in the symptomatology of coronary ischemia, and that is why still today also a lot of our colleagues basically fail to recognize that these symptoms may be because of coronary ischemia, and that is why the diagnosis of cardiovascular disease in women is hampered. However, now we are quite aggressive on investigations. We do a lot of comprehensive investigation if a lady complains of shortness of breath or dyspnea on routine activities and all those things. And generally, we are in a better position to diagnose and treat. So the cardiovascular mortality has plateaued since around 2000, year 2000. Before that, it was continuously rising. Now, there are several studies basically which there are several studies basically which sort of were put into action to identify and to address this issue of increasing cardiovascular disease in women. And the major study was a WISE study. Then there were NHLBI, Heart, Tooth, AHA, WISE study, and guideline campaigns basically. And they generally have yielded their results basically, and the mortality among diabetic women has now plateaued basically and is gradually coming down. Now, this is the mortality in the women, and blue line is in the men. And as you can see that the mortality in women is steadily declining after the year 2000 or so because of our intense efforts in recognizing and controlling these conditions. Now, if you see prevalence of cardiovascular disease in women, here I'm talking of women irrespective of diabetic status. Worldwide, 8.6 million women die from heart disease each year, accounting for a third of all deaths in women. 8 million women in USA are currently living with heart disease, and of them, 35,000 are under the age of 65. 435,000 American women have heart attacks annually. 83,000 are under the age of 65 with an average age of 70.4 years. 267,000 women die each year from heart attacks, which kills 6 times as many women as breast cancer. So the mortality is 6 times that of breast cancer. So that is why it is an important disease to identify. Another 31,887 women die each year of congestive heart failure, representing 62.6% of all heart failure deaths. And the third CVD, which is there in women, is the CV stroke, basically. So, myocardial ischemia, congestive cardiac failure, and CV stroke are in that priority, are the 3 important CVD risks in diabetes, which are more in diabetic women. Now, compared to men, 42% of women who have heart attacks die within a year, compared to 24% in men. Under the age of 50, women's heart attacks are twice as likely as men to be fatal. So the most important age to watch for in women is 35 to 55 years of age. And of this, 35 to 45 is an important bracket. And beyond 55, the women's heart disease generally behave similar to men. But before that, they have a different sort of heart disease. Now, compared to men, 46% women and 22% of men heart attack survivors will be disabled with heart failure within 6 years. So more women disabled with heart failure. Women are 2 to 3 times as likely to die from following heart bypass surgery. Younger aged women between age of 40 to 59 years are up to 4 times more likely to die from heart attack bypass surgery than men of the same age. So more deaths, more disabilities, more CCF, and more deaths following CABG in women compared to men. Women are twice as likely as men to die within the first few weeks after suffering a heart attack. 38% of women and 25% of men will die within 1 year of first recognized heart attack. Since 1984, more women than men have died each year from heart disease, and the gap between men and women's survival continues to widen. Now, this was a meta-analysis of various papers, basically, which studied the incidence of cardiac disease in women with diabetes, and the conclusion was this umbrella review evaluated the quality of meta-analysis and demonstrated that females with type 2 diabetes have a higher risk of cardiovascular outcomes than their male counterparts. Future studies examining the sex differences in outcomes should attempt to address the heterogeneity and epidemiological factors for a better quality of evidence. Policymakers should consider sex-specific differences in implementing effective tailored therapies to tackle type 2 diabetes mellitus. And there is a talk also that we should have gender specific clinics. Women should be addressed differently. Their women's clinic should be different basically because their mode of presentation, the disease they harbor are all quite different from males basically, and they require a gender specific approach as far as the addressing the issue of CVD is concerned. Now, why women are at higher risk of cardiovascular disease? Estrogen levels drop during menopause. Smoking, these are the risk factors which lead to high risk of cardiovascular disease in women. And this is for both non-diabetic and diabetic women. Smoking, hypertension, dyslipidemia, overweight, obesity, physical inactivity, diabetes, family history of early heart disease, and age 55 and above. Now, heart disease risk factors which multiply the effects and result in more incidence of CVD. Women who smoke risk having heart attack 19 years earlier than non-smoking women. Women with hypertension experience a risk of developing CAD 3.5 times that of females with normal blood pressure. High blood pressure is more common in women taking oral contraceptives, especially in obese women. Women with diabetes have more than double the risk of heart attack than non-diabetic women. Diabetes doubles the risk of second heart attack in women, but not in men. Now, women with diabetes who are overweight carry an even higher risk compared to men. Women with diabetes, even if it is type 1 or 2, type 2 doesn't matter, carry an excessive relative risk of heart disease, heart failure, and stroke compared to men. Younger diabetic women in the age category of 35 to 55 years of age who develop cardiovascular disease have worse outcomes compared to men. Men carry the women with diabetes carry a greater load of risk factors, that is obesity. They have more hypertension, more dyslipidemia, and with diabetes, the CVD protecting effects of estrogens also wean off basically. So estrogens are also not helpful in protecting against CVD in diabetic women. Psychosocial factors are also more prominent in women, especially depression and anxiety, because they have to take care of the home, the children, and there are a lot of stresses basically. Now, in general, if you see, women have more life expectancy than men. That is the thing which is definitely there. So, if women with diabetes, women develop diabetes basically, then they lose more life years compared to men, especially if irrespective of the fact whether they have type 1 or type 2 diabetes, or if they have type 1 diabetes, then the years of life lost are even much more. women's cardiovascular symptoms are different than men. They are often not recognized and hence timely detection of CVD is often missed with resultant adverse complications. Typical symptoms described in textbook mainly pertain to symptoms of CVD in men. Majority of the trials are male-centric and more data trials are needed to quantify the CVD risk in women with diabetes. Now, non-obstructive coronary artery disease and microvascular angina is more common in women with diabetes, especially in younger age. Heart failure with preserved ejection fraction is also more common in women with diabetes. And as you know, there are no major effective treatment available for the above conditions, although SGLT2 inhibitors have recently been approved for heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. However, these conditions carry a worse prognosis than obstructive CAD, for which we have a good treatment available. Women who have gestation diabetes mellitus, preeclampsia, PCOS, preterm birth all relate to higher CVD mortality, especially in those who have diabetes. So basically, PCOS is very, very common now in ladies, basically, and all of this, basically, all of these four conditions have impart a higher risk of CVD, especially if the women have diabetes. Now, what are the key tests for heart disease risk? Basically, blood pressure, generally better to keep it less than 120/80. For every 10 to 20 rise in blood pressure, you have a significantly greater risk of CVD in women, especially if they are diabetic. Lipids, basically total cholesterol, to be kept less than 200. HDL in women desirable is more than 50. LDL should be less than 130. And if the lady is diabetic, then we have to quantify the risk. Even if the risk is less, we have to keep the LDL less than 100. In high risk, we may go to less than 70. With the very high risk, less than 55. And extremely high risk, less than 40. Triglyceride should be kept less than 150 milligram per deciliter. And as you know that diabetics have a typical diabetic dyslipidemia where even though the LDL is not that high, but what we have is low HDL and high triglycerides. And this issue of triglycerides, although the Westerners are not very fond of triglycerides, in India we are very, very keen on controlling triglycerides. And we know that this is one lipid which, though ignored, carries an excessive risk. So we definitely control the triglycerides. Also, fasting sugars should be less than 100. Body mass index, generally in Western populations, should be less than 25, but in Indians, it translates to less than 23. Beyond 23, we quantify our patients as overweight and then subsequently obese. The waist circumference is very important. Waist to hip ratio is also very important. Generally, we should have less than 35 inches in women. In Indian subset of women, basically the figures are still lower. So, coming to the key tests for heart disease risk, basically, now in the diabetic patients, it is very, very essential to take periodic ECG, basically. And why it is very important to take periodic ECG? Because a lot of diabetes patients have silent ischemia. A lot of them will gradually go on to progress cardiomyopathy, and therefore a periodic ECG may provide clue to the development of these conditions or in previous occurrence of silent MIO, so which is not very uncommon. However, the issue with women basically is that they have a lot of non-specific changes in ECG, and because of these non-specific changes, you may not be able to discern on ECG or diagnose on ECG whether this lady has a ischemic heart disease or not, and therefore further test may also be warranted in these subset of ladies. Stress test records heart's electrical activity while exercising. Now, why women don't take action against heart disease? They don't put their health as top priority. They think they are not old enough to be at risk. They feel too busy to make changes in their lives. They are already feeling stressed. They are tired. Now, this was a study which was coronary heart disease mortality amongst young adults in US, which was done from 1980 to 2002, basically, and it included women and men aged 35 years older using ICD-9 codes in US Census data. Mortality from CHD fell from 52% in men and 49% in women. Improved mortality each decade from 1980s, 1990s, and till 2000, and from that part, it has plateaued. Now you see that there is actual increase in mortality in women from 35 to 54 years, and especially amongst women with 35 to 45. This is because of bad lifestyle. Women are protected against heart disease because of estrogens, because of their favorable waist to hip ratio, because of carrying less fat in liver, uh, and uh, uh, these factors are protective for heart disease in women. However, because of a very adverse lifestyle in younger women. A lot of them are obese. They've lost that benefit of waist to hip ratio. The ladies also have, I must tell you that they have more superficial fat than visceral fat in a normal lady because they carry a lot of fat on in thighs and hips and all those areas. However, this advantage is also lost in the younger generation because they eat a lot, they drink a lot of sugar sweetened beverages, they are hardly any exercise, they are existing on fast foods, and this leads to increased dyslipidemia. The hypertension they develop also, the BP shoots up on the higher side very fast. The dyslipidemia is also there. The waist to hip advantage is also lost in many of the women. Fatty liver is also there in a lot of women. And all of this basically leads to an actual increase in mortality in age 35 to 55, especially the age of 35 to 45 is very dangerous because they can have sudden cardiac death in this age group basically. So mortality is definitely high in this age group. Now this is the Ranko-Bernard study, angina and mortality in patients of diabetes, and you can see that with normal glycemia, post-menopausal women, the hazard ratio for heart disease is more than men. However, if there is impaired glucose tolerance, then the hazard ratio climbs to 2.35 compared to the normal non-diabetic female of that area and higher than the male counterparts. And with type 2 diabetes, the hazard ratio goes up to 3.55, which is definitely on the higher side. If you see the gender differences in obstructive CAD, then a very peculiar point in women is that in younger age group, the CAD they harbor is generally non-obstructive CAD, and it is not the obstructive CAD which they harbor. And that is why if you see the different age groups, basically, the incidence of obstructive CAD basically is more in males than females. Females, non-obstructive CAD is more. Now, cardiovascular impact of biological and metabolic diabetic abnormalities. And if you see the women, basically, this is the onset of diabetes. This is the long duration of the diabetes. In shorter duration, they have more of cystoid dysfunction, regional wall motion abnormalities, and decreased segmental perfusion. But a lot of them have diastolic dysfunction, microinfarction, myocardial fibrosis. All of this leads to cardiomyopathy, altered metabolism and abnormal ST segment changes, decreased subendocardial perfusion, endothelial and microvascular dysfunction. So a non-obstructive CAD is more common in women than in men, and that is what we have to take into account. Now, gender differences in ischemic heart disease in women, structural features, smaller size of vessels, increased stiffness of the myocardium because of fibrosis, remodeling, more diffuse disease, more plaque erosion versus rupture, microemboli, rarefaction, dropouts, disarrays. So all of these are subsequent to non-obstructive disease with small vessels, with diffuse disease, functional features. There is endothelial dysfunction, smooth muscle dysfunction, more of Raynaud's phenomena, migraine, coronary artery spasm, inflammation. You have more plasma markers of inflammations, vasculitis, especially these Takas, Yakus, vasculitis is more common and they have more of connective tissues. All these leads to functional dysfunction as far as the myocardial perfusion is concerned. So they have both the structural as well as functional features which are unique to women. Now you see this those menopausal women who have low estrogens, higher PCOS, higher visceral obesity, and that leads to low estrogen levels, more hypertension, obesity, hyperlipidemia, and then more chances of autoimmune diseases, which we discussed in the previous slide. This leads to an excess inflammatory milieu, which leads to abnormal coronary reactivity with microvascular dysfunction, endothelial dysfunction, metabolic changes, and decreased perfusion, leading to microvascular angina, positive coronary remodeling. There is increased wall thickness, plaque erosion, and distal embolization. And all of this will leads to basically higher chances of subclinical atherosclerosis and higher chances of non-obstructive coronary artery disease. And some of them also have obstructive CAD. And all of this basically carry a much worse prognosis than men with diabetes. The coronaries in women become functionally abnormal more often even before they become obstructed, causing microvascular angina. This phenomena is less likely in men. Now, model of microvascular angina in women, we have basically hormonal alterations, that is sex-specific precautions like PCOS, low estrogens, menopause, leading to hormonal alterations coupled with pro-atherogenic factors like hyperlipidemia, hypertension, smoking, metabolic dysfunction, inflammation. This leads to pro-vasculopathy because of pro-thrombotic factors being prominent. And then if there is early menopause and this factor clustering, basically this adds insult to the injury basically. And we may have non-obstructive atheroma or obstructive atheroma, more of subendocardial or epicardial ischemia and vascular dysfunction symptoms, which lead to atypical symptoms, including prolonged symptoms at rest, shortness of breath, unusual fatigue, and more frequent pattern are seen in women. Women are more likely to have angina, non-STD, elevation MI, coronary syndromes, frank heart attacks, and sudden cardiac death with open arteries. This is due to issues with microvascular disease, especially in diabetes. The microcirculation is affected in the as it is affected in the eyes, kidneys, and brain. Now, gender differences. There is a test which is called as coronary flow reserve. Basically, they see the coronary flow at baseline, and then they give some vasodilating compounds basically, and see the how much the flow improves. And if it is less than 2, the still is generally has a worse prognosis, and women basically have a poorer coronary flow reserve than men. And this is a test to diagnose microvascular angina, not widely available. Coronary flow reserve is a marker of microvascular angina. Women have smaller coronaries with respect to their heart rate, body surface area, and less coronary flow reserve compared to men, and hence are disadvantaged. This increases with diabetes, dyslipidemia, obesity, smoking, etc. And this leads to the symptoms. Now, if ladies older women behave like men and are more likely to have obstructive coronary artery disease, young women more likely to have microvascular disease. Now, how to diagnose? Basically, if there is a person coming with, we have risk stratification, a lot of risk stratification factors available. In US, they use more of ASCVD risk stratification. In Europe, they have scores too, basically, which they use basically. If by these risk scores you have an intermediate patient lady with intermediate risk, basically, then you can subject this lady to initial exercise treadmill test. You also assist his the functional capacity of the lady by using this assisted daily living score basically, or the Duke score basically. And if it is a limited, then naturally she will not be able to exercise. You have to go for stress imaging, or you have to go for CT, coronary angiography. Now, CT calcium score is a non-invasive test basically, where you can with CT quantify the calcium levels. Less than 100 carry less risk, 100 to 300 is moderate risk, and more than 300 is high risk basically. More than 300 calcium score, more chances of obstructive CAD. In stress imaging, you have dovetal stress echo, which is a good test which can quantify the risk of future events of coronary insufficiency and MI in your patient's basically. So with the use of these strategies, you can further diagnose whether patient is having a cardiac involvement because of ischemic heart disease. Low risk population does not benefit from exercise treadmill. Exercise treadmill testing is more diagnostic, more diagnostically difficult in females basically because as we already seen, females have tendency to have non-specific SCD changes, and these changes may lead to a difficulty in diagnosis of ischemic heart disease in those undergoing the exercise treadmill. However, you can see the functional capacity, how much the lady can walk, whether she get dyspnea, whether she gets chest pain on walking, all those things you can assess during exercise treadmill. For intermediate IHD risk with no resting STT abnormalities, myocardial imaging reserved only for those women who cannot exercise or are at intermediate or high risk population with ECG abnormalities. So as I already told that if you have baseline ECG abnormalities, not much wise to do exercise treadmill. And in exercise treadmill, there is a tendency that we send our technician to do it basically. Ideally, in such cases where there is a diagnostic dilemma, we should be present ourselves basically to supervise this exercise treadmill so that we are wiser after the test. Women study 2-year MACE rates, exercise treadmill versus exercise myocardial perfusion imaging, that is stress technician scan and so. So in low risk population, if you do it, basically there is no incremental benefit of initial diagnostic strategy of exercise MPI versus ETT. So basically, in both you are seeing that the same prognosis is there, and so they should not test a asymptomatic or a low risk lady with diabetes with very high-fi investigations because they are unlikely to yield any benefit, especially if there are no symptoms, especially if this lady is asymptomatic. Now, diet study skinning and cardiac abnormalities in asymptomatic diabetics with CAD. So these are asymptomatic and type 2 diabetes with no symptoms. And routine screening of asymptomatic patients with diabetes is not justified because you are not going to improve prognosis and you will not be able to justify the cost and time involved in these unnecessary tests, basically. Now, gender differences. If you see the absence of obstructive coronary artery disease should not reassure that a woman has no risk of cardiac event. Aggressive risk factor management is required in diabetic women, considering the fact that non-obstructive coronary artery disease with microvascular angina is more common in them. And therefore, if you can see in women, basically, they have more of non-obstructive coronary artery disease. This was a body study of type 2 diabetes and CAD by gender. Despite less obstructive coronary artery disease, females more likely to die of cardiovascular event. This calls for different approach to diagnosis of CAD in women compared to men. So this is the same thing which are reiterating. Now, which are the mechanisms of coronary ischemia? We have a stable plaque basically with ejection in coronary flow reserve and demand ischemia on stress, the ischemia develops and angina may develop. There is a vulnerable plaque which leads to plaque rupture and leads to thrombosis and acute coronary syndrome and infarction happening. Then we have a focal transient vasospasm, which is Prince medullary, which is treated with calcium channel blockers. And there is a persistent vasospasm, which leads to myocardial infarction. So all of these four mechanisms basically may lead to myocardial injury. Microvascular dysfunction impairs coronary physiology and myocardial blood flow in subjects with risk factors, contributes to myocardial ischemia with CAD and cardiomyopathy, induces severe acute ischemia, that is a Tokotsulu disease, which is called. So this scheme diagram shows 3 different ways you can have myocardial ischemia, and all of them are equally lethal. The microvascular dysfunction more common in women, also thought to be etiology for Tokotsulu, that is stress cardiomyopathy or broken heart syndrome. Now, if you see the gender differences, the cumulative incidence of MACE basically, so if males and females have microvascular angina, then the morbidity is similar in both groups. Basically, this is the CFR less than 2 and CFR more than 2 basically. So basically it is not that the microvascular angina in women is more having more incidence of morbidity and mortality than men. If men also have microvascular angina, then the incidence similar. It is only that females are more likely to have microvascular angina than men basically. Now, clinical considerations for optimal management. You also have, you know that antiplatelets, beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, statins, then acute events being treated by thrombolytics, ACE inhibitors, ARVs. Now we have ARNI, basically, this is the novel side, and we have SGLT2 inhibitors, and we also have finerenone, basically, in this disease with secretaries, we have the diuretics, basically. So these are all drugs, basically, which we have to use. And if you see the studies, basically, the HbA1c now is getting better control. LDL-C is getting better control. BMI is getting better control. Waist cycle because of increased awareness at the population level. However, the incidence and prevalence of CVD is rising, and this is because our life expectancy has increased, and a lot of our population is aging, progressing to the 70s and 80s. And because of this increasing population, elderly population, the numbers are getting up, although the incidence is going down because of a lot of interventions, lot of awareness, and lot of primordial prevention activities. Now, this was a very, very unique trial, which was look ahead trial, which compared intensive lifestyle interventions with only diabetes education. Basically, here the patient in diabetes education group, the patient were living a normal life, but they were sort of educated about the dietary part and the other parts like sleep and lack of stress and all those things. An intensive lifestyle modification group was also subjected to intensive exercise, basically, and there was a good amount out of weight loss, basically. And as you can see, a lot of patients achieved HbA1c less than 7. Blood pressure also was better in intensive lifestyle modification group. LDL-C was also better in intensive lifestyle group. So good risk factor reduction associated with weight loss in the intensive lifestyle modification group, which you can also see in this slide also. So the first outcome, RCT to achieve and maintain weight loss in at-risk CVD subjects. And it was seen that although you had a good control of all the risk factors, still there was not much benefit on the macrovascular disease front. Basically, the microvascular disease did show some improvement, the quality of life did show some improvement, but macrovascular disease did not show that significant benefit. And that is why we tell that we should control the diabetes and the other receptors in the initial phases, in the initial 5 years, very well, basically, because this leads to metabolic memory, this leads to legislative effect, and the long-term prevention of the macrovascular disease like coronary artery disease, like stroke, like erectile dysfunction. All of this basically is significantly better achieved if we control all these sectors in the initial phases when the disease is diagnosed. Later on, was it the subendocrine dysfunction has set in when the plaques have already set in, then the control will not lead to that much fantastic preventive prevention and that much fantastic reduction in the future events. Now, statins basically are very, very important for control of these CVD diseases. And as you can see, the diabetics, majority of them in the age group of 40 to 75 quantify for statin therapy, moderate reduction or severe reduction in LDL is targeted in this subgroup. In those less than 40, we don't have larger trials. However, they have a longer life and earlier control of lipids is better, basically, if we are to prevent events in the long term, and even if they have one or two significant risk factors for CAD, they are more likely to develop CAD in 50s or 60s, and therefore a good discussion with the general population, the patient physician discussion is very, very important. And if these subjects are convinced, basically, then in indicated subjects, we should initiate statin therapy and continue it lifelong. In subjects more than 75 years, we have a different scoring system. We don't have much data. All of these who are already on statin should be continuing on statin beyond 75 years. But whether initiating statin in these conditions is helpful or not is a $1 million question. When the patient is high risk, then you should definitely counsel, have a discussion with the patient, and then if it evolves into a consensus, then you should initiate statin in this age group. However, if in this age group you have a myocardial infarction or a stroke, then we generally start statin even in this age group that is beyond 75 years of age. Now, high intensity statin therapy aims at reduction of LDL-C by more than 50%. Moderate intensity statin therapy aims at reduction of LDL-C by 30 to 50% of the baseline LDL, and low intensity, which is less than 30%. Now, if you are unable to achieve this much reduction with the statins, maximally tolerated dose of statins, then you should add other drugs like ezetimibe, like valproic acid. The most potent drugs for decreasing statins are PCSK9 inhibitors, basically, which may be given as a weekly injections, and then there are monthly injections also, which are available. Now, what about the primary prevention of in women? Meta-analysis of exclusive primary prevention statin trials in women, and as you can see that primary prevention in indicated women, especially with diabetes, does yield favorable events and should always be considered. Moderate to high intensity statins, CV reduction versus new diabetes mellitus. Now it is said that statins basically lead to enhanced risk of diabetes. However, this risk basically, if you see the benefit with the statin therapy, then benefits far outweigh the risk. And the risk is more so in those who are predisposed to develop diabetes in the short or longer term. So in these subset of patients, definitely there is an excess risk of diabetes in patients taking statin. Or if you see the CVD risk goes down very, very dramatically with the institution of appropriate doses of statins, and numbers needed to harm is lower than for moderate intensity statins. However, more research is needed basically. However, statins are one drug which are beyond doubt shown to decrease significantly the incidence of CVD in the long run. Why not treat to target the controversy? Unknown benefits for titration compared to known benefit risk with fixed dose statins. What about HDL, non-HDL, and triglyceride? Now, there are several drugs which have got the HDL levels to a significantly high levels, but they have not translated into clinical benefits. And for that matter, it is said that raising HDL strategies have all failed till date, although the research continues. The non-HDL basically is used if your triglycerides basically remain beyond 200 basically, and here basically we take the help of non-HDL cholesterols, and this is a very popular test, and we try to bring the non-HDL cholesterol to the levels which are 30 milligram beyond the target LDL levels. So if our target LDL level is 70, then non-HDL should be less than 100. Triglycerides should be kept below 150, and we are now having some drugs basically which are the fibrates. The purified EPAs also basically decrease triglycerides to the tune of 40 to 50% in the dose of 2 to 4 grams daily. So we have some drugs basically which are FDA approved basically for decreasing triglycerides, and decreasing the triglycerides also is important if they are significantly raised. In older asymptomatic or younger patients with family history, we already have discussed if they carry the risk or if they already have a CV event, then we have to initiate statin therapy in these patients. Now, coming to BP, we had ACCORD trial where intensive BP control versus the conventional BP control was studied basically and did not translate into a significantly improved outcome in the form of severe death, MI, or stroke, or this is not substantiated with the other studies, because stroke basically is one area of CVD which definitely is benefited as the BP drops to levels near systolic of 100-110. Serious events were more common in the intensive control group because of postural hypertension and all. And in the elderly, therefore, it is said that you can even manage with the blood pressure of systolic 150, 160 if patient is not tolerating lower blood pressures. The BARI-2 study conducted in diabetic and non-diabetics with obstructive coronary artery disease in both sexes, and there was a prompt coronary revascularization versus intensive medical therapy, with intensive medical therapy alone, with later revascularization only in for clinical indications. So two groups, one was offered prompt coronary revascularization with intensive medical therapy, and second was offered only intensive medical therapy and revascularization done if patients develop ischemic events. And you can see that in both the groups, the morbidity and mortality is almost similar. So optimal medical therapy has equivalent outcomes as coronary revascularization in appropriately selected patients of stable ISD and not unstable CAD patients. For complex coronary lesions, CABG has better results than PCI in diabetic patients. Insulin sensitization versus insulin provision, and even if you go for insulin sensitization, then it is having an equally good prognosis than insulin provision. So if you use insulin sensitizers like metformin, like thiazoles, like imeglimin, and improve bring the diabetes under control, is almost equivalent to providing the secretive box and insulins. Now, COURAGE trials, this is the second trial to demonstrate that for stable CAD, optimal medical therapy is as good as coronary revascularization, with much less complications related to dual antibiotic therapy and stent restenosis post-PCI. What was striking was that women had a less mortality compared to men with the revascularization, that is PCI versus a plus optimal medical therapy strategy. 20% of the study population was diabetic. Similar results seen in this trial to diabetic with stable IgG to be treated on the same lines and as non-diabetics. Both males and females studied with male preponderance in this study because males have more obstructive coronary artery disease. Their numbers are more. The results showed a clear advantage of CABG on PCI in this particular patient population which had triple ulcer disease or complex coronary disease. So to summarize, cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death in women. Diabetes is the double whammy in women, fourfold increase in severity, morbidity, and mortality. Angina is more common manifestation, microvascular angina and ischemia without epicardial COD in women is prevalent and significant. Treatments effective for symptoms and ischemia management in symptomatic women with evidence of ischemia and obstructive or non-obstructive CAD. All patients with angina, aggressive risk factor modification, and optimized medical management must be instituted. CABG is preferred in women and men with diabetes for revascularization for mortality benefits in indicated patients like triple ulcer disease or complex cardiac lesions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Akash, for a very informative talk. And I'm sure a lot of us have known something more about specialties of some diseases or cardiovascular disease in women especially. So now the house is open for comments and discussion.
Yes, very
What is
nice.
broken
picture.
heart symptom? Broken heart syndrome?
Which syndrome, sir?
What is broken heart syndrome?
Broken heart syndrome. What happens in women is that they have more of microsplanchnia. What is microsplanchnia? Is that the coronary artery reserve is decreased. The microcirculation, the vasodilatation is decreased, and there is a lot of pro-atherogenic factors which lead to microemboli uh, going to the microcirculation of the heart, and all of this leads to micro damage in the heart musculature, and also the fibrosis is becomes more prominent, and that leads to the more of myocardial stiffness and fibrosis. The extracellular matrix is increased, and the myocardial bulk is decreased. All of this leads to cardiomyopathy, and this cardiomyopathy gradually translates into reduced ejection fraction, more diastolic dysfunction. So there is more both systolic and diastolic dysfunction, and subsequent development of heart failure in your patients. And this is called as broken heart syndrome, basically, which is basically a sort of a cardiomyopathy with poor performance of the heart, more on the systolic and diastolic front, with congestive cardiac failure. So this is what is called as broken heart syndrome.
So diastolic dysfunction is likely to lead to that?
Basically, it is a stress-induced cardiomyopathy, basically, and diastolic dysfunction is a inability to relax, basically, to accumulate more blood. So diastolic dysfunction is considered to be as bad as systolic dysfunction, because it also does not have a proper treatment also. So patients with diastolic dysfunction have a equally bad prognosis as severe LV dysfunction, and this all of this basically is more common in women with diabetes, and the problem with this is that even if you go for a test like angiocoronary angiography and so, the bigger vessels are all open basically. So you are left in dilemma how to diagnose this condition. So that is another thing which is hampering diagnosis. Now we have a test called as pro-anti-BNP, which basically is a natriuretic peptide which is increased in patients of heart failure, and that is now a very useful test to diagnose a diastolic heart failure in our ladies, basically.
So now can we say that there is a paradigm shift in primary prevention, particularly associated with diabetes and CVD in women? Now there is aspirin is practically out after 75 and statin to be given. That is what we can say.
Absolutely, because we are not using aspirin indiscriminately, because the risk of GI bleed outweighs the benefits of prevention of future CVD events. For secondary prevention or for very high risk cases where a CVD event is most likely, we give aspirin. But for intermediate risk or low risk patients, we generally do not give straight aspirin because it is not indicated. However, statins are the drugs which are indicated, but we are not using them because of a lot of inertia from the healthcare providers, a lot of reluctance from the patients to use them. And even if the statins are being used, they are not being used in the guideline directed dosages. Basically, we are using less dose of statins basically for whatsoever reasons. So that is what is generally seen in Indian subset.
Why are statins so much in controversy? Why people fear taking statins?
Actually, statins are in great controversy because across the world there are a lot of people who are very conservative or who are more with naturopathy or alternate medicine part basically, and they basically are putting up a lot of information on WhatsApp and social media, which is against the statin use basically, and all of this is leading to a lot of confusion. If you see our own medical community, we are changing our guidelines very, very frequently. The hypertension guidelines are changing. Even the diabetes cutoffs are being lowered basically. So everything is leading to allegations that we are lowering these cutoffs of sugars, of blood pressure, of other parameters to include more patients in the disease segment. And that is what is also sort of leading to criticism even from the medical fraternity also. And the patients are also being informed, the communication with the patient is also going in a wrong manner basically. So unless we, even the lipid guidelines, first we had specific LDL targets, and then the AHA suddenly announced that there are no targets. We just, in high risk cases, decrease the LDL to 50% from baseline, and so and so. And then again, they came back to target. So everything is so haphazardly being done basically just to prove that we are doing something different from the earlier basically. So there's a lot of controversy. Even the diagnosis of pre-diabetes, WHO says that 110 is the fasting. The AHA and other organizations, 100 is the fasting. So basically, there is a controversy there also. So everywhere there is so much of a controversy that ultimately there is no clarity even in the medical field on a lot of issues, and this all leads to a very, very wrong message being conveyed.
Very well summarized. Thank you. Any other question or comment?
Akash, how
Yes.
long can be blood thinners be given, aspirin and clopidogrel, after a cardiac event?
After a procedure,
Yes.
aspirin clopidogrel, generally should be given for a year basically after a procedure, especially with a high risk. But if the patient continues to have high risk status or has a sort of risk factor profile which is very risky, then you can continue it for a longer duration. And there's no specified longer duration which is defined. Basically, you can continue. A lot of our patients are on indefinite and dual antiplatelet therapy. A patient also has other existing diseases like peripheral artery disease, and so forth, which also are like DVT. So there, basically, we can even go for one drug like aspirin and combine it with drugs like rivaroxaban also to confer a added advantage. So it all depends on the patient profile. There's no clear-cut guidelines. What they say is that at least a year after angioplasty, you continue with dual antiplatelet therapy, and then you can take a call depending on the individual patient.
Any more questions, comments? So thank you, Dr. Akash, for agreeing to be our guest speaker on a very short notice. And thanks to Kiran Bhai once again for having a good speaker with our club. So we end the session. Yes, Kiran Bhai?
Yes, okay. Now perfect.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. So we end the session here. We meet again.